Good morning, Marion. I hope you have had a wonderful weekend so far, and I hope that the weather has been cooperating for all the activities and fellowshipping and retreating and just plain being together in such a wonderful setting like Cove Valley. I am Monica Miller. Many of you know me. There's maybe a couple of you who don't, but I really wish I could be with you there in person, but my parents will have to suffice. Traveling long distances is really tough for me, and having very limited stamina and mobility concerns makes enjoying a church retreat kind of impossible for me. But I hope that this recording can stand in for the hugs and the conversations that I wish I could have with you this weekend, because it's been a while. It has been a long while since I have seen you. 4 years. A lot has happened in 4 years. Many ups and a lot of downs. But I am grateful that my physical health is at a good place right now. Last time I left you all, I was heading for Indianapolis to pastor a congregation there. And I pastored for about 2 years before resigning. It was a really rocky resignation. And I stuck around in Indianapolis for another year after that. I was not successful in getting long-term disability benefits, so I had to pack up and bring the Indianapolis chapter of my life to a close. And right around that time, my parents and my brother James moved to Goshen, Indiana, and so this spring I moved in as well. So I'm coming to you today from Goshen, and it has taken me quite a bit of time to get settled in and to figure out what's next, and that what's next question I have been able to kick a little further down the road because I have recently accepted an interim pastorate, half-time, at Kalamazoo Mennonite Fellowship in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And so I commute from Goshen every other Sunday, and I will come alongside them to pastor for a little while as I continue to discern the long-term picture. So that is a bit about where I've been and what I've been up to the last few years and what this next stretch looks like for me. This is the second time I have recorded a sermon for you for Church Retreat. The first time was several years ago, pinch hitting when your speaker needed to step back last minute. And that speaker's wife was pregnant with twins at the time, and she gave birth right before the retreat. So the speaker needed to be at home for obvious reasons. The retreat planning committee at that time called me up, "Please help!" Okay. And I pre-recorded a sermon on short notice. This year, however, I had a little bit more time to prepare because it wasn't an emergency. This was the plan all along. But when it came to what to talk about, I wondered with the planning committee if y'all might have a question that I have had myself, and I've heard from many other folks also, about Genesis chapter 1. That we know God has given us humans the responsibility to take care of the earth, and that we could have done a little better. But then, did God tell us in Genesis 1 to subdue and have dominion over the earth? And did God really mean that? I mean, it doesn't say to steward or to cultivate or to care for the earth. It says subdue it, to assert dominion over it. And is that what God really meant? And did something get lost in translation? Surely God didn't mean for us to destroy it and to damage the earth like we have been. So what do we do with that? But earth isn't all of creation. Last night, my dad led you on a journey away from Earth, through the cosmos in pictures, exploring beautiful nebulas, dazzling galaxies, and waving hello to our neighbor planets. Creation is huge, like really huge. The vastness of outer space is mind-bogglingly ginormous, and it fills us with awe and wonder to behold. And you're telling me we're supposed to subdue that? Have dominion over that? Most, if not all of us here today will never leave the surface of the earth except to get on an airplane. How we interact with that big part of creation that is far beyond our reach as non-astronauts, how we interact with that is in worship, marveling at what Creator God spoke into being, what God invited into existence. And so we peek through telescopes and look at pictures that spark curiosity and surprise and admiration for God's handiwork, even though we'll never touch it. Even though we in this room will never subdue the sun or assert dominion over the stars. But what about this part of creation? The ground beneath your feet, the trees surrounding you, the birds you might be able to hear. This part of creation that we can touch. How are we supposed to live on this planet, in this part of creation where we live and work and play and gather for worship and retreat? How are we supposed to treat these trees and birds and everything? As followers of Jesus, what is our responsibility toward the earth? Should we really subdue and dominate? So that is where we're headed this morning. So you might want to buckle up, Buttercup, because we have quite the quagmire on our hands, and we're going to dive right into that mess. The good thing about a recording like this is that you can come back and listen to it again if you want, because sometimes a second pass can be helpful to pick up anything you might miss the first time. So let's get this crash course on creation questions started. Would you join me in prayer, please? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Pop quiz time. This is a little hard to do pre-recorded, but let's see how it goes. You'll have to each keep track of your own score and see if anyone can get all of these questions right. There are only 3. Question number 1. What is the first command that God gives in the Bible? Hint, it is right here in Genesis 1. I'll give you some time to think. Answer: be fruitful and multiply. Let there be light. Grammatically, technically, is not an imperative command, but we're going to leave the grammar at school. We are on retreat right now. So, question number 2. To whom or what does God give that first command? That first command, be fruitful and multiply. Who is on the receiving end of that? Answer: fish. In verse 22. God does not say that to humans until verse 28. And for those who thought the answer was humans, it's okay. That question got me the first time too. So, how are we doing on the score? Did anyone survive both questions? Final question. Last chance. Question number 3. How many different creation stories are there in the Bible? Across both Old and New Testaments, how many accounts of the creation of the world are there? I will give you a little extra time to think and stress yourselves out because, oh no, if she's asking how many there are, there's probably more than one. But how many across the whole Bible? But what if it's a trick question and there's only one? Answer time. Everyone's favorite answer. It depends. It depends. And if I was in youth group with Pastor Dustin back in the day, I would have to put a quarter in the jar for answering a question with "it depends." How many creation stories are there in the Bible? It depends who you ask. There are at least 4 big ones. Genesis 1, Genesis 2. Yes, those are separate stories, side by side, not one continuous story. They don't line up and kind of contradict each other in rather large ways. Part of Proverbs chapter 8, wisdom personified, describes what it was like to help God create the world, that wisdom was woven into every inch of it. And the 4th big one, John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and so on. And depending on how you define what counts as a creation story, some biblical scholars have counted more than 20 across the whole Bible. But that fact alone, the fact that there are so many, should make us pause. Because if there's more than one, what are we dealing with here? What kind of story do we have on our hands? What kind of stories do we have on our hands? Because if you track all of the Bible's creation stories down and try to harmonize them into one single play-by-play of precisely how God created the universe and the earth, it doesn't work. But before we clutch any pearls, before you go, oh no, Monica's gone off the deep end. I mean, maybe you already thought that, but here I am. What if trying to Tetris them all together into one singular play-by-play of the creation of the universe, what if that's not the only way to hold them? What if that is not the only thing that we can do with them? Because if they don't all line up, then do we just throw some out? But they're in the Bible. So what if there is another set of questions we can ask about this? What if there is a different set of questions that the Bible's creation stories can answer for us? Questions like, why are we here? Is there something or someone else out there that's bigger than us? What are they like? And what is our relationship to them like? And when we look around at everything around us, what is our place in all this? What is the big picture, and where do we fit in it? Those kinds of questions yield rich answers. Those are really big questions, and one singular play-by-play wouldn't be enough to answer them. And so for questions that big and that important, no one short creation story can answer them all. And so in that case, I am glad we have so many. It's like a mosaic, where we get a clearer picture when we consider all the pieces together. They don't fit together like a puzzle, but they do come together like a mosaic. But we don't have time to talk about all of the creation stories in our sacred Bible this morning. We would be here all year until next church retreat. So what about the first one? Just the first one. Genesis 1. When we look at the Genesis 1 piece of the mosaic, what is it that Genesis 1 brings to the table? And I think we can get some rich insight when we consider the first scribes who wrote Genesis 1 thousands of years ago, and what questions they might have been asking. So, who was that? Genesis 1 started out as an oral story told around the campfire over and over, passed down that way through storytellers for generations and generations and generations until someone wrote it down. Until someone wrote down what we have. And scholarly consensus is that that was probably during sometime during the Babylonian exile. It was probably an Israelite, a Jewish priest, exiled in Babylon, the capital city of the empire that wiped them off the map. It's probably that person writing this down. And for that scribe, that priest, in that context, with what they faced in their daily life, they were probably not as concerned about the precise order of events by which the universe came into existence, or the length of a day, in the face of collective PTSD and generational trauma from being ripped from their houses and sent on death marches as their homeland burned. The person inspired by the Holy Spirit to finally write down Genesis 1 was probably concerned with questions like, does God even exist? I thought we were God's chosen people, but look what's happened to us. Does God even care? Did God even notice? Is God actually in control, or was God too weak to stop this? Or is God so far away that God can't help us anymore? Is violent chaos how this story ends? Those are tough questions. And they're questions that Genesis 1 begins to answer. And so keeping that context of exile in mind is key here, like really key here, for reading this creation story that has been so misused to justify harming God's earth in the name of subduing and having dominion over it. So, will you roll up your sleeves and take the plunge with me? Rolling up sleeve number 1, we've got to ask, what is the sticking point here? Where is this hangup in Genesis chapter 1? The hard part is those two words, those two Hebrew words, sometimes translated as subdue and have dominion over. And we find these culprits lurking in verse 28. Those translations seem to imply that the earth is ours to use and abuse as we please, which has contributed to our present crisis. And so I put on my detective cap and did some digging, idealistically hoping to resolve this right where the presenting issue is. Surely these are just overly harsh translations of words that can reasonably be translated in other softer ways, right? Surely a little flick of the translator pen can fix this. No dice. In Hebrew, they are just as bad as they sound in English. And when you look at how those Hebrew words are used in other Bible verses, there's not much wiggle room here with the words themselves. And in fact, there's almost wiggle room to color them even worse. So, what do? We close the book, call it a day, and pretend Genesis 1 doesn't exist. We didn't roll up our other sleeve yet, so I think there might be a little bit more digging to do. Because so far, all we have done is zero in on those two words and make some assumptions from our comfy armchairs. Well, my comfy armchair. You're probably not sitting in a comfy armchair, but metaphorically speaking, our comfy armchairs. In a country that is accustomed to asserting global dominance. So let's roll up our other sleeve now, zoom out just a little, and change our posture. I would like to propose a little different avenue to explore. Rather than just assuming that the words subdue and dominion are subduing and dominating this story, just taking them at face value, what if the rest of Genesis chapter 1 is subverting and critiquing and redefining those words? What if the rest of this creation story is setting limits and boundaries that make it impossible to assert dominion and subjugation as they're commonly understood? What if the rest of Genesis 1 is actively undermining those two words? Let's listen for a little while from the underside of empire and consider the rest of this creation chronicle. I have 3 questions for the rest of our morning today. The first is, what does it mean for humanity to be created in the image of God? And the second is, who is this God anyways? What kind of God are we the image of? And finally, what does it mean to be like God? And if you're glancing at your watch thinking, oh my goodness, how long is she gonna talk? Don't worry, we're actually already halfway through. This introduction took half of the sermon. First question. What does it mean for all of humanity to be created in the image of God? As usual, the warm southwestern sun was shining as I found my way to class. It was only my first or second week of seminary, and I was still getting used to the fact that many of the classrooms opened directly to the outdoors. So I took one last look over the towering palm trees shading the grassy courtyard before I slipped into class, found a seat, and sat down. Systematic Theology with Dr. Lee. And that is the sort of class that the professor makes or breaks. You will either die of boredom or you will survive somehow. And I quickly grew to like Dr. Lee, not just because he cared about us as whole people and would frequently launch into hysterical, satirical rants, but I also really liked him because he would fearlessly name hard truths, and he could back up even his most provocative statements with solid arguments. And that day in class, he asked, all people are created in the image of God, right? And all of us nodded. He continued, at no point in history has that ever actually been true. He let that statement hang in the air before he explained that all people are created in the image of God has always been the orthodox teaching position of the Christian church, but that has never been practiced on the ground. Whether it was racism and anti-Semitism, the Crusades, classism, civilizing the savages, converting the barbarians, conquesting into the promised land, that's never actually been true by and large, has it? The words sound nice, but if we're honest, we have yet to fully live them out. All people are created in the image of God, but some people more than others. And for the uprooted and traumatized exiles living in the Babylonian Empire, they were keenly aware that in the ancient Near East, only the kings were the divine image. Only the kings were the earthly manifestation and image of their gods. So what a ridiculous claim that all people are created in the image of God? Not just the kings who subdue and dominate, but all people. There is no hierarchy here, and there is no room for hierarchy here in Genesis 1, and any social practice to the contrary, be it empires with monarchies or democracies with systemic injustices and inequalities, none of these are in line with what's described in Genesis 1. And so we see how this undercuts our 2 problem words with a sharp, deep slice. Because whatever subdue and dominion look like when humans subdue and dominate creation, they must be bound to God's assertion that all people are created in the image of God, no exceptions. And so when the least among us are suffering, the image of God is suffering. When the homes of others are endangered by a climate in crisis, the image of God is endangered. When the health and welfare of others are threatened by our greedy control over and careless extraction of natural resources, the image of God is threatened. Because behind the pen of Genesis 1, we don't have a global superpower asserting dominance and leveraging military might to secure natural resources. Behind the pen of Genesis 1, we have a community of exiles and refugees asserting that they are not just collateral damage in empire's quest for dominion and subjugation over the earth. We, too, are created in the image of God. Our lives matter. And this isn't even flipping the script where the oppressed become oppressors because there were no chosen people yet. God hasn't singled anyone out for special treatment or supremacy in Genesis 1. From underneath the iron fist of empire's dominion, Genesis 1 cries out that refugee lives matter, immigrant lives matter, oppressed lives matter. And I call to mind one of the parables of Jesus, the parable of the sheep and the goats. And when I see this parable, I see its roots running deep through the prophets all the way back to Genesis chapter 1. Lord, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? When did we see you a stranger and house you? When did we see you naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick and ensure you have the health care you need? When did we see you detained and visit you? Truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. This is what it means that all people are created in the image of God, no exceptions. Question 2. Who is this God? If we're created in the image of a God, what is that God like? And Genesis 1 is the very first thing in the Bible. It's our first impression of God. And we all know how important first impressions are. So this first impression better get to the heart of what God is like, right? But it's also a little hard if we don't have anyone else to compare to. Sometimes it's easier to see what God is not like, so we have a contrast. So allow me to give you a little taste of one of the Babylonian creation stories called Enuma Elish. This was the most popular creation story in the Babylonian scene, where our exiles were exiled to, and the scribes behind Genesis 1 would have been very familiar with this creation story. And so a summary of the Enuma Elish goes something like this. In the beginning, there was a godlike watery chaos and a goddess. And over time, they birthed a whole family tree of hundreds of deities. But after a while, the gods began to quibble, scheme, and then all out fight with each other. The pantheon divided into two factions, and each faction had its champion. In one corner, we had the god Marduk, and in the other corner, the goddess Tiamat. Marduk and Tiamat really duked it out in a fight to the death. And after a long and gruesome battle, Marduk slew Tiamat, and her dismembered body was what he created the earth and the sky out of. And to cement his victory, Marduk and the other gods sacrificed Tiamat's second-in-command god, and used his spilled blood to create humans, so that humans could do the work on earth that the gods were tired of doing. And the story ends with a long litany of praises to Marduk, the champion and king of all of the gods. And that is Monica's Cliff Notes version of the Enuma Elish. It's a little different from Genesis 1, and by a little, I mean a lot. Let's briefly touch on 3 of the bigger differences. First, in Genesis 1, there is no conflict or violence. God isn't creating the world from violence or bloodshed or death, nor is God establishing supremacy through conquest or fighting power. And when God provides food for humans, in verse 29, God only provides plants, not animals. And so there's not even hunting for food, let alone hunting for sport. There is zero physical violence here. Zero. Second, there is no competition between a host of gods. God is unquestionably the sole actor here. And in fact, the writers have gone out of their way to avoid using very common Hebrew words that kind of sound similar to the names of some of the Babylonian gods. They avoided using those words just to make sure no one mishears and gets confused. No, none of those other gods are here. Our God is in full control beyond a shadow of a doubt. And third, if we put together a scrapbook of notable moments in Genesis 1, we really only have photos of God as creator, inviting the world into existence with words, and God as sustainer, making sure creation's needs are provided for. God is creating things to flourish, not extracting from them for God's own purposes. And God hasn't created slaves, but rather image bearers. Creation also doesn't end with self-aggrandizement. It doesn't end with 50 reasons why this God is better than the rest of them. And you won't believe number 32. It ends with rest for everyone and everything. This is the God Genesis 1 introduces us to, a profoundly peaceful creator who provides and sustains. And this is the God in whose image we have been created. This is who we are to reflect in the world. And it seems like such a far cry from the images we call to mind when we picture domination and subjugation. And we have all too quickly come around to the final question of the morning. What does it mean that humans are like God? Well, if nothing else, it means that we're not God. We're only like God. Creation belongs to God. God created it. It does not belong to us. God has given it as a gift, but that doesn't somehow put us on equal footing with the gift giver. In Hebrew, there was no separation or distinction between humans and nature, as though humans are somehow outside of nature or in a different category from nature. We are creatures. We are part of it, thoroughly within it, and not distinguished from it. And when this creation story comes to a close in Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, the text says, "This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created." Humans aren't mentioned. We are not so important as to be singled out and named. We are certainly included. The heavens and the earth includes us too. And that's precisely it. It includes us too. We're not above creation as its creators. We are right alongside, within, among creation as creatures. We bear God's image as creative sustainers and providers, but we are not God. We are only like God. We are like a God who sustains and provides in Genesis 1, and we are like a God who comes near as one of us in Jesus, not dominating in a show of force or subjugation, but through love, grace, justice, peace, mercy. And so with all that we've unpacked this morning, the importance of everyone being made in God's image, not just the domineering elites. With the God we're introduced to being a profoundly peaceful creator and sustainer, and that we are not God but only like God, still very much among creation as creatures ourselves. With all of that, it's a little hard for me to see how our traditional understandings of subdue and have dominion over fit within the picture that the rest of Genesis 1 paints. Because it seems to me like there's a little irony here. Like the scribe in exile is giving us a little wink. Because at the end of the day, this contrast of the words dominion and subdue with the rest of Genesis 1 is a massive gulf. It's jarring enough to be a conversation starter, to prompt conscious thought about our posture within creation, rather than just cruising on autopilot to subdue and dominate. And we would never get here without asking that different set of questions. A set of questions that the exiles in Babylon might have asked. No matter how hard we try to avoid it, there is just plain no escaping the ways that we internalize being members of a global superpower and how deeply that shapes what we see in the Bible. And when wrinkles like this show up, wait a minute, this understanding I have of subduing and dominating that I know from Empire, that doesn't square with what I know about Jesus. Those kinds of wrinkles are ripe for a pull, to peel back a layer. And it takes continued and conscious work to remind ourselves and to unlearn, to listen at the feet of diverse and disenfranchised and dehumanized voices, like the voices in exile. And so I hope that this morning was a faithful exercise in that. So in a context of exile where the pain you and your community carry is oh so heavy, where the powers that be have thrust your world into chaos, and where you ask every day, where is God in all of this? Genesis 1 answers with a peaceful, creating God who lovingly weaves life out of formless void and then calls us to do the same. So what do we do with these two troubling words, subdue and have dominion? We lean in and listen broadly and tread lightly as creatures bearing the image of our loving Creator and Sustainer God.